Good morning, everyone. Please remain standing for prayers by our Chaplain Canon Thomas before we start the meeting. Thank you. Please be seated. If I read through some notices before we start. I'd like to remind you all that this council meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people wish to view it. There is no need, therefore, for any other filming of the meeting to take place. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I would like to welcome everybody attending the meeting today and anybody watching the meeting via the webcast. However, can I ask all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent? If there is an emergency alarm, follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic car park. If we have any motions or amendments during the meeting, I will need them to be clear, please, before we go to the vote. We move on to agenda item 1, attendance. The attendance register will be going around the room. Please can all members sign it and send it on. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Dominique Redmond, have we had any apologies, please?
I've had apologies from councillors Hugh Bevan, Veronica Crick, Cathy Evans, Elizabeth Haynes and Mike Jeremiah.
Thank you. Members, are there any other apologies you know of? Okay then, moving on to item 3, declarations of interest. Monitoring Officer, do you have any advice for members, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have given advice to members, and that's in relation to a couple of items on the agenda. With regard to number 14, which relates to Blaenavon Town Centre Conservation Area, there are 7 properties affected on Broad Street and Cross Street, Blaenavon. And my advice is that you have a prejudicial interest if you or a close personal associate own or occupy any of the properties, then that's a prejudicial interest. Now, I've not been made aware of any interest regarding that item. In relation to agenda item number 15, which relates to trees at Broadway Road, again, my advice is that you have an interest in relation to that item if you or a close personal associate are affected by those proposals. Again, I'm not aware of any interest in relation to that item. With regard to the pay policy statement, which is agenda item number 11, as this relates to the pay of officers, most officers will be required to leave the room when this item is being discussed. The item will be presented by the leader, but could I ask members to agree that Jason Lewis, the Head of Strategic Human Resources, stays purely to respond to any points of clarification or detail, and that Dominic Redman stays to take the minutes, and that Chris Slade stays to use the webcast. So if I could just ask members to agree that. I've no further comments.
Thank you, members. Are there any other interests that anybody wishes to declare? Okay, as we go along, if you do have any interest, can you please make sure they're also written on the form? Moving on to agenda item 4, we move to page 5, the agenda, the minutes from the meeting of the 30th of January. Can somebody move that the minutes are correct? Thank you. Are we all agreed? Thank you, members. Agenda item 5, update on actions. Members, the updates on what has been done to implement our previous decisions start on page 41 of the agenda. Are there any comments or questions? Yeah.
Just a question, really. It says on here action completed concerning a review of the council trees policy. Will the new council tree policy not be coming to council?
Is anybody able to answer? Hi, does one of the officers like to respond?
Thank you, members. The policy has gone to scrutiny and there have been recommendations received. The next stage now will be for consideration by the executive member and then a report taken to Cabinet as a policy decision. And we're just working through the refinement of the document at the moment, with it to come forward in due course.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions, members? Okay, in that case, are we happy to note the updates? May I have a show of hands? You're happy? Thank you. Thank you, members. They are noted. We move on to agenda item 6, receipt of petitions. We have no petitions today, so we'll move on to item 7, which is public question time. Again, there are no public questions, so we'll move straight on to item 8, announcements. Leader, do you have any announcements, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and welcome, councillors, to the meeting. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your wedding over the weekend. It was a pleasure to be able to attend the reception, and best wishes for a long and happy life together. Secondly, another word of congratulations to Frog Bikes this time on them being awarded the relationship with Cycling USA, and that's great news for a really thriving local company and a local success story from their base out in Mamilad. So congratulations to them, and I look forward to continuing to work with them. Next, I'd like to welcome Councillor Emma Rapier to her seat in the Chamber today, and good luck to you in your life as a councillor. I'd also like to wish good luck to Pontypool in their cup game against Merthyr on Saturday. Last time Pontypool played at Bather, they reportedly caused an earthquake, so hopefully they'll have a similar impact on Saturday in the cup. And it's one beast from the east that we can all cheer on, I hope, on Saturday. So good luck to Pontypool and to all the other 12-line sports sides in action. I'd like to finish by commending the work of 2 local groups who I think really exemplify the good work that goes on in our community. First is to Griffithstown Primary School for their work they've done with dementia patients. I don't know if councillors have seen it, but there's some really heartwarming videos on the internet and on the news programmes. One was from an elderly gentleman who recently lost his wife and is suffering with dementia, saying that not only did the visit of the children from the school make his day, they made his week and his year. And that really is a touching example of how very different age groups in our community can come together to really provide mutual benefit and to provide a shining light in some people going through a difficult part of their lives. So thank you to all the staff and all the pupils who've been involved in that. Lastly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been involved in the restoration of the War Memorial Gates in Pontypool. To Alan Jones, to Gaynor James, to Groves Painters and Decorators, and all those who've helped out with that restoration. Again, that's a great example of how, as a council, we've been able to provide materials, we've looked for funding, and then a local painter and decorator has very generously agreed to do the work for free. It's a great example of coming together really to bring back the memorial gates to the state they deserve to be in, as a mark of respect to those who have died in the service of our country. So thank you to all those who have been involved in that.
Thank you, Leader. Chief Executive, do you have any announcement?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We move on to agenda item 9 then. Armed Forces Employer Recognition Scheme presentation of certificate. Can I ask Councillor Alan Jones, as the Council's Armed Forces champion, I believe will be leading the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Torfaen signed up to the Armed Forces Community Covenant in 2013, and since then this Council has honoured its pledge and worked with families of those who have served or are serving in the armed forces within our communities. We recognise the sacrifices of the armed forces and try to raise awareness of issues affecting them and their families, and also to remove the barriers with help and support. Recognition of this Council's work is welcomed, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mrs Audrey Nealon, Regional Director of the Defence Employer Recognition Scheme, to say a few words. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Audrey Nealon. I'm the Regional Employer Engagement Director for Reserve Forces and Cadets Association for Wales. Thank you for inviting me along this morning to present this award. As we've heard, the Armed Forces Covenant is a promise from the nation to those who serve or who have served and their families, which says that we will do all we can to ensure they are treated fairly and not disadvantaged in their day-to-day lives. To do that, the Armed Forces Covenant relies on the people, communities and businesses of Wales to actively support it to make a meaningful difference. In order to harness that goodwill, I believe that you, Torfaen County Borough Council, have an opportunity to influence and educate them about the benefits of employing reservists, service leavers, spouses, cadet force adult volunteers and wounded, injured and sick in their organisations, and tell them how they can contribute real value to a business, bringing a plethora of skills and experience. It's my pleasure to present the Ministry of Defence Employer Recognition Scheme Bronze Award, and I look forward to seeing you collect your Silver Award in the not too distant future.
Can I just thank Audrey and the others for that, and just to reassure members that the Armed Forces Covenant is something that Alan, myself and I know the rest of the Council takes very seriously, and we welcome councillors across the spectrum if you've got any contribution you'd like to make on helping us observe that covenant and be a real exemplar council in terms of how we treat armed forces serving personnel and veterans, then we're more than happy to talk any time.
Okay then, members, if we move on to agenda item 10, Budget 2018-19, a medium-term financial plan. I ask Nigel Aurelius, Assistant Chief Executive, to present your report for us, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to briefly introduce the budget, its construct and conclusion, together with some commentary as your Finance Director. I'll then hand over to the leader, who will deal with the policy direction of the budget and the corporate and financial plan going forward. This is the 12th budget I presented to Torfaen Council, and I must say in some significant respects this has felt quite the strangest to me personally, basically in that I've missed around 3.5 months of the process. Therefore, I'm going to start this introduction to the budget with a note of thanks to David Lilly, together with his colleagues in financial services, who at relatively short notice had to step up to the plate. Personally, I think Dave did a terrific job in my absence, and the fact that you have a final balanced budget to consider today is in no small part down to his efforts and the leadership he showed. So thank you, Dave. As a rider to that, I think that kind of strength in depth is a credit to this council, and it's certainly not unique to financial services. We have it right across the council. This time last year, which was the last budget for the previous council, I commented that they had to wrestle with the most difficult settlements that the local government had to deal with. And I drew reference to the fact that in terms of funding from central government, it had fallen over that period, 13-14 to 17-18, by some nearly £12 million, or 8.25%. As I come on to later when we talk through the budget construct, that contraction in central government funding for vital public services has continued. And whilst we will always look for efficiencies and endeavour to do more for less, you cannot avoid the fact that such a sustained reduction in public sector funding necessitates very difficult choices. So your first budget as a council is following the pattern of a lot that have gone before. And we cannot ignore the difficult choices. We have to set a balanced budget, and hiding behind any excessive use of reserves to put off those choices is not something that I would allow or recommend. The narrative in the medium-term financial plan indicates that our general fund balance could only support about 7 days of spending power on recurring spend. And also, you've only got to look across to England and the situation in Northamptonshire. I don't know the exact circumstances within that authority, but for their Director of Finance to issue a Section 114 notice, it must be severe. And it stands as a stark reality that we will face other authorities if they don't make the difficult decisions and live within the funding envelope they have, however much we may not like it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't press our case, both as an individual council and as a local government community, for adequate funding, particularly for social care, from the Welsh Government. Financial assistance and support for social care in particular at a community level and aimed at early intervention and prevention would undoubtedly assist the NHS in Wales. But the messages coming out from the Welsh Government are that we can expect and should plan for more of the same because of the funding settlements that they are expecting. So turning now to the budget for 2018-19, in your council papers, starting on page 45, you have the overall covering report on the budget. This includes the statutory recommendations, which I'll come back to later. You then have the budget book report as Appendix 1, which itself has 4 annexes. The full list of the mitigations, the full budget book or the estimates, the updated medium-term financial plan and the capital programme. There are then 5 more appendices, which include property bandings, council tax by band, the wellbeing assessment, the environment policy, and the Treasury management strategy and prudential indicators. I do apologise for the overall length of the document, but setting a budget is a little more complex than it was when I did my first 12 years ago. I'll come back to the covering report and the formal recommendations, but I'm going to briefly go through the budget book report and annexes, which start on page 57 of the Council agenda. The first part of the report effectively takes you through the journey of the budget, including the provisional and final settlements, our initial first draft gap, the impact of the pay award offer, which was received just before Christmas, the proposed full mitigations to ensure a balanced position, and then the final proposals. As part of those final proposals, you'll also see reference to another spring clean, which will be undertaken and funded appropriately from reserves. You will see that from the report that we continue to only receive single-year settlements, despite indications each year from the Welsh Government that they would consider multi-year settlements. I do appreciate the difficulties they face in terms of providing forward indications, but I'm expected to provide you, as a council, with a forward forecast on which you can plan, and in some ways I feel I'm doing that in a little bit of a vacuum. And it certainly doesn't help or fit in with the spirit of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is aimed at making us take longer-term decisions. There is commentary in paragraph 6.3 outlining the scrutiny recommendations and the response of the Executive in respect of those. In summary, we received a reduced settlement from the Welsh Government of minus 0.2% in cash terms. We've had 7 million of identified mitigations, but have managed to fund investments or pressures, which include schools of around 700,000 and social care of £2 million. The mitigations in full are listed in the relevant annex. Once again, the overall approach for 2018-19 has been focused on delivering on or protecting the investment in Corporate Plan 3 priorities of education attainment, protecting the vulnerable and maintaining a greener and cleaner borough. The report then goes on to our medium-term financial plan, and the most significant issue to draw to Council's attention is that we are anticipating financial challenges over the period to 2022-23 to be around £25 million inclusive of school pressures. The impact of the pay award going forward has been significant, and I continue to estimate, based on reducing Welsh Government funding of 1% cash per annum. The T22 programme will be essential in allowing the Council to make sensible choices in addressing these challenges. The report then goes on to outline the risks, our reserves policy and the capital programme. In terms of the latter, it continues to have our 21st Century School programme to the fore, and it does have some investment in highways as well. The key messages on page 57 summarise the position. Unhypothecated settlement, better than expected, but still another cash reduction of 0.2%. Service area savings proposals, the fact that the Welsh Government has not provided any settlement data into the medium term, a medium-term financial plan that has been revised, and the capital programme that is dominated by Band A of the 21st Century School programme. And our reserves policy is reproduced. I'm now returning to the covering report, which starts on page 45. Paragraph 4.1 details my professional review around reserves, contingency and estimates, which I have to give to you as a council when setting the budget. Paragraph 5 then takes members through the council tax information based upon an increase for Torfaen County Borough element of 4.95%. Our Band D will then be standard £1,241.61, an increase of £58.56 over 17-18. The report then, an appendices update on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and public awareness, our workforce plan, asset management plan and procurement policy. The environment policy is there again for approval, and then we have the section on our Treasury management strategy and prudential indicators in Appendix 6. The Audit Committee has already considered the Treasury report prior to it coming to Council for approval, as is usually the case. I would, however, draw Council's attention to paragraph 11.2 of the report, which details a change in timing around City Deal that requires capital cover to be given. The sums in question do not breach those agreed in January 2017 by Council for the overall City Deal funding. It's simply a change in timing surrounding the first investment the City Deal has made. And that then follows through to a specific recommendation around that. The recommendations, which are formal in nature, start on page 52 and are in 5 parts: to approve the budget, the statutory recommendations, which are in standard form in relation to the budget requirement and the council tax, and in relation to the police precept, it says proposes in the paper. We've now, subsequent to the papers going out, had confirmation that that is the stated precept that has been agreed. Updates in relation to the supporting plans, and then the Treasury Management Strategy and the City Deal recommendation. As is the case when the budget concludes, I do like to put on record some thanks. I've already mentioned Dave and his colleagues. So some other thanks. All my colleague chief officers and their teams for their support in once again developing this budget. It gets more and more difficult each year, and their support and that of their teams is always very much appreciated. I say at this time every year that the collective responsibility we show when dealing with the budget is always in place, as is the discipline, and I think that remains a strength of the organisation in how we put the budgets together. Richard Edmonds, Lynn Williams and their colleagues in strategic services, in terms of all the comms and public consultations and all the democratic stuff that has to be done around the budget, particularly the scrutiny teams. In respect of the latter point, I believe that scrutiny and the workshop style approach continues to be a strength that improves each year. The meeting last month, a little bit later than normal, primarily for the difficulties that we had in terms of the budget this year, but the meeting was once again had plenty of vibrancy and real challenge, and as you'll see from the papers, the recommendations have impacted on the final proposals. So thank you, Madam Mayor. I understand the leader is going to make a statement, and after that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you. To start with, I wanted to just draw your attention to the slides on the screen, really, to focus our minds on the key facts and challenges facing us as councils, because these are challenges that face every council in the UK. It's not just a Torvine thing. There are 22 similar meetings going on this month in Wales, and some even more stark ones, as Nigel alluded to, over in England, with the likes of Northamptonshire facing problems. So I think it's important to draw attention to the key facts. The first pie chart up there, the writing's quite small, so I'll take you through it. This is basically where we get our funding from. So the green slice there is our funding that comes from council tax. That's about 15% of our budget. The red slice there is non-domestic rates, which forms 11% of our funding. The blue slice is basically the main grant from the Welsh Government. That's 38% of our funding. The darker sort of purple one next to the green one is other sort of specific grants from the government. The lighter blue one above that is customer and client receipts, which is 7%, and other funding is 5%. That really shows the impact of the challenges council faces, because if the mid-blue government grants and the purple government grants ones decrease, the ability of the small green wedge to bridge that gap is very limited indeed, and that shows the difficulty facing councils under the current council tax situation. If I take you to the next slide, then this is basically our outgoings. This is where the money goes, and I think this is important because there's obviously lots of debate about funding for local government, and I think in many ways that's a bit of a misnomer. It's not funding for local government, it's funding for local services. You'll see 57% of that pie chart is taken up by children's social care, which is the grey slice, adult social care, which is the orange slice, and schools budgets, direct to schools, which is the blue slice. So that's a majority of our funding. And when we talk about prioritisation, I think it's key to keep that in mind, because sometimes when councils are told to prioritise schools and social care, it's spoken as if that's a small wedge of the money that we spend. It's not. It's over half the money we spend. And so if we are to protect those areas, the impact on everything else can quite quickly become massive. If I take you on to the third chart now, this is sort of one of the graphs of doom we're often shown as leaders or finance members and Section 151 officers as well, I'm sure Nigel will add, looking at the medium-term financial pressures facing councils. The yellow line there is basically the funding line, and the three lines that go upwards are the other pressures. And that shows that the challenge facing local services isn't just one of decreasing funding, it's one of the combination of decreasing funding and increasing costs and pressures on our services, and particularly looking at social care. So I think those are sort of three sort of key contexts from which to start. I want to continue by echoing Nigel's words. Obviously, he missed one person out of his thanks, and that's himself. I very much hope it's the last year Nigel has to miss 3 months under such circumstances, because we all missed him. I'm sure he'd rather had 3 months on holiday rather than recovering from a major operation. But we did all miss him. But I think it's tantamount to the strength in depth that Nigel points out, that Dave and his colleagues were so able to step up and fill the gap left by Nigel. I think another comment that bears repeating is what Nigel said about our corporate and collective discipline as part of the budget process. Paragraph 4.1 refers to that in the report. It's very easy for budgets in an organisation like this that deals with lots of distinct and separate services to become a bit of a bun fight between those services as they all look to compete with each other about who's got the biggest claim to stake on limited resources. It hasn't ever got like that in my time at this organisation, and that's due to the calm management not only of Nigel and Alison but of the other officers in taking a very responsible approach to budgeting. So I'd like to thank chief officers as well for their work and their contribution to that atmosphere. I'd like to thank Cabinet for their diligence. It's not been an easy budget process for us. I hauled everyone in, I think, the day after New Year's Day to really have a sort of 2.5 long days of looking through things line by line. I was really impressed by the way that Cabinet got on with that job and really sort of got invested in the process rather than just sitting still and letting others get on with it. They really dug down into that process and have been committed to this. So thank you to Cabinet. I'd also like to thank scrutiny members for their comments and their contribution. I hope the report at 6.3 shows we've tried to do our best to take your comments into account, even though things are difficult. I really value the scrutiny process that we've formed in recent years. It's something we've tried for new members. We've tried to improve each year from a situation where we used to just have a sort of a set-piece event in this chamber with members getting up and making speeches and then a different member making a speech and nothing really happening. We've tried to instigate a process where there's the ability of members to challenge both myself and chief officers and to ask questions and to really get down into the meat and bones of the situation. That's always an evolving improvement process. I'm always certainly welcome suggestions on how we can take that forward in future years and improve it to continue that journey and to make sure that as much as we can, you as members have an opportunity to shape the budget. Now I say that and I give that thanks because it's not been an easy process this year. I recognise that whatever our colours, we got into local government to provide for our communities, not to make cuts year after year like we've been forced into. Nigel talked about the cash reduction in our settlement, but as I said, the real challenge lies in that gap between the cost of providing services as demand rises and the settlements that austerity has produced. I say that in the 7th year of austerity, and I apologise if I sound like a stuck record, but it is like giving a haircut to the same person 7 days in a row. Sooner or later you run out of hair to trim. The first couple of haircuts are easy, but then you're left with more scalp and less hair as each year goes by. And that's the situation faced by local services under austerity. And I have to be blunt in saying that, and to say that we oppose austerity here, and if austerity continues, public services themselves are under threat. Council simply can't continue to provide the services we expect with less and less money. It just doesn't add up. If we want services like schools, social care, community facilities and other services to be properly funded, austerity must end, and that message comes from me and I'm sure other members in this chamber loud and clear. But in the meantime, we can't just complain. We realise that we've got a job to do, to roll up our sleeves and do our best to keep vital services running. This year we've had more change and uncertainty in the process than ever. That's included the pay offer, which added over £1 million to our pressures at a late stage. And neither have we been able to look at just this year alone. Nigel meant the medium-term financial plan that's included in your report, and that shows there's over £25 million of pressures coming over the next 4 years. So, you know, the end of the tunnel that we were promised in 2012 within sort of 4 or 5 years by central government seems to keep being moved back. And that's a real challenge as there's less and less sort of meat to trim from the bones of local services. So as the easy choices disappear, it's clear to me, certainly, that we have to put services first. And in that context, I think this budget delivers as best we can in those tough circumstances. As Nigel said, there's more money for social care for the vulnerable in this budget. There's almost £2 million to help protect vulnerable children and adults. There's more money for schools. I recognise that schools are still facing very difficult budgets, as a governor myself and as a parent of children. But we're delivering an extra £700,000 into our schools, despite our budget being cut. I wish we could be in a situation where the government would fund us fairly and we could therefore provide more money to help schools meet the pressures that they have, but I believe that we're doing our best to try and help them through a difficult time. There's more money for the spring clean and for road resurfacing, in line with the priorities that local residents often express to us as members, and all the consultation results that we've had have come back as priorities for the public. There's money to continue paying the real living wage to our workers, which I believe is important, not just because it's the right thing to do, because it's the best way to deliver sustainable services in the long term. After all, local services are nothing apart from the sum of the contribution of the local workers that work in them. There's money for the compassionate council that we want to be. We've talked in previous councils about exempting care leavers from council tax, waiving child burial fees, helping prevent homelessness through discretionary housing payments, to give just 3 examples. But I believe those are targeted examples where, even in the atmosphere of austerity, we can show our values as a compassionate council. There's money to maintain our Prevention and Early Intervention Fund, which I believe is vital to help people before they reach crisis and to build long-term sustainability in public services, very much along the lines of the Welfare of Future Generations Act. I say that because we believe that we shouldn't just be passive as a council in the face of increasing poverty and suffering. We want to work for social justice and to help those in need. We've tried to tie the budget process to our priorities, as articulated in our corporate plan, of raising educational attainment, protecting the vulnerable, and a cleaner and greener Torvine. That prioritisation is vital in such tough times, because I want to be clear, if we try to prioritise everything, we'll end up prioritising nothing at all. And that's why the budget process is categorised by me repeating several things, probably until you're all bored to tears, but one of which is, if we don't like a particular saving, what would we save in its place? It's no good for us just to say we don't like things or they're too difficult. We have to come up with alternatives if we're to have a balanced budget. And I know that's meant a lot of tough decisions, for example on the mayoral position. But if we're going to protect vital services, we have to change all parts of our organisation to be more ruthlessly efficient, and that has to extend to all parts of the organisation. There can be no areas free of the lens of scrutiny. It's also meant the difficult decision of having to ask for a 4.95% rise in council tax. This is in line with most other councils and below some, but I recognise it's not easy. But that's the reality of austerity. As the money we get from central government declines, if we want to keep services going, local council taxpayers end up paying more. And if anyone in this chamber wants to freeze council tax, they'll have to show me where £2 million more could be cut from local services this year alone. My view is the reality is that £2 million more of cuts this year would be catastrophic for local services and for the communities we serve. Some people say that council should be meaner and leaner, that we should sack staff and instead contract out local services. I say no. That would be a short-term gain at the expense of long-term pain. Instead, I want to work in partnership with our staff and trade unions to provide public services. And I want to end very much in that vein with a message to 4 key groups of people. First of all, a thank you to our local government workers. They're perhaps the true hidden heroes of austerity Britain. Each year they're being asked to do more with less. Each year they're ever more under strain. The last 7 years they've faced real-term pay cuts, which have seen their spending power eroded by up to 21%. So I wanted to say thank you to them. We realise that local services, as I've said before, are nothing if not the sum total of your efforts and your dedication. Local government workers are often unfairly maligned in sections of the press as overpaid pen pushers. Our average salary, as you'll see in a later report today, is around £20,000, and those are often modestly paid people working hard with fewer colleagues to deliver schools, to deliver social care, to deliver community services, to keep our borough cleaner and greener, collect our refuse and deal with the issues that come up as part of running the local council. And I really want to thank them for their efforts. Secondly, a message to Welsh Government. I recognise your efforts to limit cuts in our funding. Please continue to work with us. and please recognise the vital preventative, long-term role of the services we provide, like schools, recycling and care for the vulnerable. I believe since May there really is a new generation of local government leaders that have formed. In that vein, I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's pledge for an atmosphere of respect and mutual sort of interaction between local government and Welsh Government. I really think that we should aim higher. We should aim to be better than less bad than England. And working together, I really believe that's something that we can achieve. But we've got to face up to the reality that the problems facing local governments are not due to how we're organised or to our performance. They're due to the cuts in our funding year upon year upon year. And, you know, the secret to providing better, more sustainable services has to come from an end to austerity. In that vein, my third message to the UK government is that austerity really is killing our public services and won't work in the long term, even on its own terms. And I'd like to invite any national politicians of any shade, because this isn't just a partisan point, to really witness the ground level impact of austerity year after year. Austerity in this decade really is unprecedented. I look back over budget papers over the years when putting together the budget this year, and two particularly struck me. One was from the 90s, where the council were complaining that the rise in the grant for the council didn't cover all the pressures that faced the council, that it was only a 4% rise in the amount of funding we got. To put that into context, if we had that same funding supplement this year, that would be over £9 million different this year alone. And the second one was from the 80s, where they complained about 2 years of real terms cuts in a row. People often point to the 80s as the nadir of funding of local services. What we've witnessed in this decade is above and beyond even the worst of the 1980s. And my last message then really is to councillors and to the public. And it's, I know this budget hasn't been easy, but in the circumstances I really am proud of a budget that, despite our funding being cut again, puts vital local services first. So thank you to all your contribution, and I believe that this might not be the budget that we would give in our hopes and our dreams, but I really think in the circumstances it really is the best of a tough job.
Thank you, Nigel and Leader, for those reports. Members, are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And can I start off by saying I hope we will continue to have Madam Mayor. Can I also thank Nigel for once again producing a very concise, easy to read paper, and we really appreciate you and all your staff, the hard work you put into it. Madam Mayor, can I just say that recently I had to attend a WLGA meeting, and at that WLGA meeting we were informed that the Welsh Government's budget for 2018-19 has actually been increased by £112 million. Can I emphasise that? £112 million the Welsh Government's budget has been increased by. And there was a quite firm recommendation from the WLGA that that money should be passed on to the local governments to help ease the pressures. This hasn't happened. The Welsh Government has kept it for themselves. And we were also told by the WLGA that the Welsh Government is actually holding £300 million in reserve. That's £300 million in reserve. And again, there was a firm recommendation from the WLGA that some of this money should be used to protect frontline services. Once again, Madam Mayor, this hasn't happened. And also, can I quote, it's been recognised by the economist Jerry Hoffman that although not widely publicised by the Welsh Government, they did recognise that the relative funding will remain at a fair and level for the long term. So, Madam Mayor, I will be voting against this budget because the Welsh Government is getting the money, they are basically keeping it for themselves, and they refuse to pass it on to local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yes, I'd like to thank Nigel and all his team for the hard work he's put in, not just this time but over the years. There's only two questions I have, and it's again due to cutbacks. It's sadly that the mayoral role will be going. And there's been lots of questions. I mean, it says it's saving £50,000, but there's been other people saying £60,000. If Nigel could explain that for the people who are watching on webcast, the actual savings on the mayoral role, where they all came from. And secondly, the mayor sat there with that lovely chain on. What's going to happen to the chain in the future? As we all know, it's got a very high monetary value, and has a decision been made on what will happen to that chain?
Nigel, are you okay to answer?
The saving in the mitigations is 52,000 for a full year. That will include the support the mayor gets, things such as the mayor's car, etc. In terms of what will happen with the chains, I don't have an answer to that, but you know, they'll be retained, I would think.
Just in response to the two comments, I think Councillor Bevan made a good point to start with, in that I think we take for granted sometimes how easily understandable and sort of digestible the reports are that we've produced here in Torvine by Nigel and Dave and the team. I don't think that's something we should take for granted, because it's not the same everywhere, put it that way. So thank you for those comments. Secondly, the point you made about the increase in Welsh Government budget. In cash terms, the Welsh Government budget has increased this year. In real terms, they're still down about £1 billion from where they were at the start of austerity. But you're right, we do need to lobby, I think, for more funding for local services. And this is the point I make. It's not more money for local government, it's more money for local services, for schools, for social care. And I think social care in particular, because the debate often focuses very much between Westminster and Cardiff Bay about the funding of the NHS, but I really think we need to press the case of funding of the health sector as a whole, because the funding of health and social care is what produces results. If the NHS is just funded and social care, the fabric of social care starts to disintegrate, then that's a problem for the NHS as well as a problem for us. There is an issue with the proportion of the Welsh Government block grant that's taken up by the NHS, and that increases each year as the demands on the NHS grow. And that's why I think that lobbying effort is very important on behalf of the WLGA, and I can reassure Councillor Bevan that I'll continue to lobby for proper funding for local governments. It's ironic, really. Welsh Government are the creators of the Welfare of Future Generations Bill. I would challenge them to keep that in mind as they make funding decisions for the long term and not just the short term. Areas like education obviously have a massive preventative and early interventive impact. The better start we can give our children in life, the better their outcomes will be, the better their health, the better their employment prospects, all those things which have an impact on long-term demand in public services. Similarly with social care and many of the other services we provide, they really are of key preventative impact, and I hope we can continue to make that. It's a case that's been made across party lines. I know Councillor Fox in Monmouthshire has very much been part of making that case to Welsh Government, and I look forward to working with leaders of all different shades to make that case. On the point Councillor Burnett mentions about the mayoral role, I think we're all sad to lose the role, but this is the reality, I think, of austerity Britain. We're being forced to make unpalatable choices in order to prioritise frontline services, and I respect the work of previous mayors, and I greatly respect both the mayor and the deputy mayor this year in particular, but I can't, in all honesty, expect social workers and staff in our schools to do more with less unless we're prepared to as well. And I believe that this is an opportunity, if we pass this budget, to take a report to council where we can take some of the best bits of the mayoral role, the fundraising for charity, for example, and maintain those, whilst unfortunately we have to make the difficult choice of losing the role itself. So it's not a choice that's been made with any glee or any relish. It's one that's been made with great sadness in a way, but I really think we have to be able to look our people in the eye and say that we've put local frontline services first.
Thank you. I'll have Jason out. I just wanted to say to Councillor Burnett, I thought if we want to break down, obviously being in it this year, I can tell you it's about 8k for allowances between myself and the Deputy Mayor, so that's equals to about a chairship. The lease on the car, it's about 6k, which is the sort of the civic budget for hosting civic events, etc. And then the rest of that really is staff costs. Obviously we have the civic chauffeur and staff support, so that'll be the breakdown. Jason.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The 2 points I have on this budget, the first is really building on what Councillor Bevan mentioned earlier, the national picture. Mills, sorry. Excuse me. Excuse me, Councillor Mills. The national picture, during the last budget, Wales was awarded an extra 1.2 billion. And I appreciate that's the headline figure. That's got so watered down as it comes down to local level that we obviously don't see any of it. So my question there is, where has that money gone? And why hasn't it had a bigger impact at a local level? The Assembly managed to raise their operating budget by 2.3 million, which was in the news obviously recently and decried from all sides as egregious. And when we position any kind of council tax rise to our constituents, these kind of headlines don't help the story. It doesn't help the fact that there is money out there, but it's not filtering down. And my second point is just to understand, from Nigel's point of view, this is your 12th budget, I think. How many of those 12 budgets have we raised council tax on the residents?
I'll answer the second question. Everyone.
And just to come back on that, my concern is the ease in which we're doing this. We all campaigned in May to fight for our communities. Each and every one of us has to have, or we all have constituents that are struggling. We should not take any kind of council tax increase as a given for every budget. I'd be happy to sit with any member of the Executive Committee or officers to look at ways in which we can avoid this without passing it on to the people that we represent.
First of all, apologies to Councillor Mills, it's my fault. Secondly, about the money from the Welsh Government, our budget for the Welsh Government has gone down, so there is no extra money out there. As the report says, the cut in our funding in cash terms this year, and you've got to remember that's a cash terms figure. In real terms, with inflation running at 3.1%, it's even more than that. So, unfortunately, there is no money out there, certainly not at our level. And I'd like to assure him we don't make the decision about council tax with any form of ease at all. There's £9 million of a gap that we had to bridge this year. We've bridged £7 million of it by savings and £2 million of it by the council tax rise. So we've put in £7 million and there's £2 million from the council tax rise. We recognise that's not easy for people, but unfortunately, as the first graph I put up there, the longer the government continues to take the large slice of the pie that it gives us and cut from that, the more pressure there'll be on council taxpayers. That's the unfortunate reality. I happen to believe council tax is at best imperfect system, because unlike any other tax, you have to raise it just to stand still. You have to raise council tax by 3.1% just to cover inflation, let alone the other pressures that we face. So, you know, it's not easy, but please don't ever think that it's a decision that we take lightly. And every year we say, please, if people are struggling to pay council tax, there are council tax benefits and things that they can apply for and can speak to our people about. and please don't be shy, anyone who needs that help, of coming forward to ask for that assistance.
Council tax is an immensely difficult conversation to have. Echo Anthony's comments on it really. In an ideal world, we wouldn't be raising it. But the question that has to be asked, if we're talking about, why are we raising it, is what's your alternative? What would you do otherwise? It's a fair question. And it's a question that if you did have an alternative to bring to us, we would very much embrace, because it's one that we would love to work together to find an alternative for. So that's always going to be the question. It's frustrating, but it's always going to be the question, is what is the alternative in this day and age? We would have to find a £2 million bridge somewhere else, and that's only going to come from local services. It's going to come from frontline services delivering social care, education, fighting poverty, all sorts of vital functions. That's the stark reality that we've got in front of us. So I think when we're talking about council tax, we need to remember that it is either that or that.
Councillor Yell next.
First of all, it would be remiss of me if I didn't start off by also thanking Nigel and Dave Lilly for the work that they've done collectively and independently of each other. And also pay particular notice to the input of Anthony, the leader, because as well as being the leader, he's also the Cabinet Member for Resources, and so as an integrated role with the two officers that I've already mentioned in guiding us through the budget. I'd also like to pay thanks as well to the other members of the Cabinet, because the early part of this year, after the Christmas hijinks, it was all hands to the pump, and it really was a difficult task to wend our way through the minefield of those choices that we had to make. I would echo Councillor Daniels in saying that the litmus test that we addressed was, if not this, then what? And we were going through a process of elimination until we arrived at a common theme and a common issue, and things that we felt less uncomfortable with than other options that were on the table to review. It was an exhausting and exhaustive session. I'd like also to comment on what Councillor O'Connell had said about offering his services if we wanted someone to give us guidance or advice on making savings without raising council tax. That would be a very, very good trick, and I'm more than happy to talk to you. And I have in the past suggested that you come and talk to me about other matters as well. You haven't bothered to take me up on that, but if you want to come and talk to me on advising me in particular on ways and means, that would be great. It would have been far, far better if all of the opposition group together had taken up the offer to meet with officers to discuss alternatives to our budget proposals, but my understanding is that hasn't happened. So it's a little bit contradictory, if not I can't think of the word. I'm awfully sorry. I'm not usually caught short for words, but forget that. The point I'm making is this, that the offer, as I understand it, is open every year for the opposition groups to come and talk to our finance officers and offer up alternatives. That hasn't happened. It's a bit late now to start barking at the leader because you're not happy with certain elements of the budget. And could I end by saying this as well? I hope this isn't going to be a beat Anthony fest, because Anthony was just one person in the Cabinet. There were 8 of us collectively that went through this arduous process. I'm very, very pleased, not happy at all, because nobody came into local government to to cut. I certainly didn't put my hand up to become a councillor to cut services or to cut budgets. We are forced into this position. It was a really arduous task. None of us liked it, but I think in hindsight we can all say that we took part in a process that was the best we could do at the time. And I'm bound to say this as well, that there are 22 local authorities that are going through a similar kind of process, and many of those, if not most of those, are unlikely to come up with a budget that touches most of the boxes most of the time than the one at Torvine. And I'm happy to recommend it.
Councillor Karen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite a bit has been made today about the failings of Welsh Government to pass on some of the money that's claimed that they've been receiving from Westminster. However, whilst I agree with every word that Anthony has said, and I think, to be honest, it would be right and proper should they give us a medium-term financial plan going forward. I would like to draw to this council's attention the circumstances that are happening in Northampton. Nigel alluded to the fact that there's a 114 notice. That notice is issued by a council when it does not have enough money to meet its expenditure. And this includes the depletion of any financial reserves. Northamptonshire was hoping to balance its budget this year by selling £12 million worth of land in order to keep its in-year expenditure running. Not, as we do, to pay for future capital spend, but to spend it on revenue. So all I'm trying to say here is that there are serious issues going on in local government caused by austerity. And I think we need to realise that, and we are, in many respects, one of the lucky councils that are going forward, because we have been very sensible year on year. Yes, there have been increases in council tax. They are unfortunate. Nobody wishes to stick their hand up for them. But we are a good council running a good budget, and I think we need to be proud and pleased about that. And I say thank you to Anthony and Nigel for doing such a good job.
Okay, members, any more questions or comments on this? Stuart?
I'd just like to back up what Lynn said, because I went through a scrutiny process, and I think most people agreed with the measures, bar the three that were mentioned. And mindful of the fact, I mean, the other bit came along, but mindful of the fact that was seemed sensible moves. And I've read the same thing Glyn did about Northampton as well, and we're not there. We did a sensible thing, and we're looking at sensible measures. And I think everybody agreed with him, bar the three things that came out of the scrutiny. And I'd like to commend this budget as well, to be honest.
Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's only going back to Councillor Connell's question early on. He would, if he was invited to put his opinions over, and as Councillor Yole said, if the independent group or any of the independent group would like to come along after the invite, there was no invite. When we met straight after Christmas as a cabinet, none of the independent group were ever invited to come and put their views in.
Leader?
I mean, consider that invite open whenever you want to. That's something going forward I'm always more than happy to meet. I'm sure Nigel and his officers are always happy to meet and discuss budgetary issues any time. I just wanted to mention three things that have been raised by those questions. The first one is, yes, Northampton shows the difficulties being faced by councils of all colours. I think it's very tempting for all councils to view their budgets in isolation. This is something that's affecting all councils of all different shades. The other thing that councils of all different shades are having to do is to raise council tax. There's 22 councils in Wales. Not one of them has been able to freeze council tax this year. That includes independent-led and Tory-led councils. One independent-led council is having to go to its council with a proposal for a 12.5% increase in council tax. That's the context in which we operate. They're struggling, we're struggling. There are no easy answers to this. I wish there were. If there were, I would most happily take them, even if it meant me jumping out the window head first. On social care, I think, for me, social care is the crux of any budgeting process. The danger with social care is that it's a very resource-intensive area of council operation that by its nature only affects about 10% of the population, if that. But they're 10% of the very most vulnerable people in our communities. And so I think sometimes it's easy for councils, unless they keep an eye on the vital role that social care plays, to try and take chunks of money away from social care. If we'd have done that, I think we'd have been risking the future life chances of some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And that's why I'm so proud that this budget, despite our budget money being cut, puts money into social care to address the challenges they face.
Councillor Yao.
I'd like to respond to Councillor Burnett's comments. Perhaps invitation was the wrong word. I used invitation in the context of inviting Councillor O'Connell to come and see me or any other cabinet member at any time, and that goes for anybody else. On the issue of whether or not you've had an invitation to talk to officers, you don't need an invitation, it's your right, and certainly as the leader of the opposition, it's your right to do that. If you haven't shown the initiative to take up on that right, then that's your issue, not mine.
Right then, members, I think in that case we move on to the recommendations on pages. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. What I would like to do is to make some comments about the process that we're going through at this moment in time. I don't think anybody in this room doesn't appreciate the work that Nigel and the leader and the cabinet has put in to the budget that you've had to produce. What I think we sometimes forget is who is actually responsible for local government funding in Wales. It is a Labour government that's in power in Cardiff, and they're responsible for the money that you receive. The other points that we need to look at and take note of is the fact that Wales is funded at £120 for every £100 that is given to English councils. Yes, I understand that is going to be dropping. It's going to be dropping to £110 for every £100 spent within England. But in the background to that, we in Wales are still receiving far more money than England, and that money is still being held within Welsh Government. What I would encourage the leader to do is to go to Cardiff and maybe ask for some of that money. I know Councillor Mills brought this up, but I think it's a very, very important point. You are quite right. Councils in Wales are having to put their council tax up. And this is because, not of a lack of money, but because money isn't coming to the councils when it's been allocated by central government. We speak about austerity, and we understand that this is something that needs to happen. It isn't quite as bad in Welsh Government as we are led to believe. And maybe we should go there and ask for some of this money that's already been issued. Thank you.
I'll continue to do that as WLGA Finance spokesman. I'll continue to ask for money until Cabinet Secretary's ears start bleeding. I can assure you of that. On the £120 for every £100, of course that doesn't take into account need comparisons which show that Wales is actually underfunded. I'd suggest a more valid comparison is between Wales and perhaps the northeast of England, as opposed to Wales and England as a whole. Councils across the UK are having to put up council tax, not just in Wales. And again, the money that Welsh Government has in real terms has decreased by about £1 billion. So yes, I agree. I'll lobby them strongly for funding, but macroeconomic policy is decided by the UK Government, and that's the area that needs to see greater investment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I'm not going to make no jokes about haircuts, what the leader said about, because I think this is a very serious matter here today. I am not a very happy person. I know my people out there who voted me in are not going to be very happy. But the 2 points I would like to fetch up is, in respect of caddy liners, I thank you very much for reconsidering this, and also it says further down that there's going to be reconsideration of the cemetery fees. You're not saying you're going to reduce them, you're not saying you're going to hold them, but I hope that when you come up on the 13th of March, you will reconsider this and help a little bit. Thank you very much.
If I can come in there, thank you for your question and the issue that you raised. To actually give you a bit more information about the caddy liners, is that it is still a proposed budget cut. It says 35,000, but the projected cost is actually going up because the caddy liner costs are going up, so it's more likely to be maybe 50 plus. Although officers are trying to work to keep that down, it's another budget pressure that's unlikely for us to be able to maintain. But in newer news, and very recent news, our anaerobic digestion contract is due to start on the 1st of April. And what they've said to us is that the requirement to have expensive food caddy liners is not needed in their process. In fact, they pull them out and burn them. So the option is actually available to us if we wanted to actually apply plastic bags. Now that's something that we need more detail on, because it doesn't say what thickness or who should provide those bags or any detail there, but this is a new contract, so it's important that we give time to make sure we make the right decision, especially when is that the right thing to do for residents in terms of the environment and adding more plastic to our processes, especially when we've watched things like Blue Planet and supermarkets making commitments to reduce the amount of plastic they have in their packaging. So I'm mindful of that, but I'd like to put that also in a bit more context, is that food caddy liners have only increased the participation rates of food waste by 4% since their introduction with skinny bins in 2015. That's not a lot. That's 50,000 plus potentially we're paying every year, and we're only getting a very small increase. And those people that have actually participated are more likely to have already been participating anyway. So, we have to look at the outcome, and is this actually reaching what our needs are? The idea is at present that we will continue as we work towards the contract date start with our new contract, and obviously I'll keep members posted, but we will exhaust our stocks that we have, and like I said, give you notice.
And on the point you made about cemetery fees, I think that's a fair point. What we did, it was a good example really of scrutiny being able to allow us to go back and look at something, and then we'll be bringing a report on fees more widely forward, and we can view the cemetery fees in comparison with other ones. Hopefully we'll be able to do something to respond to those concerns within that process. But yeah, thank you for those comments.
Councillor Ashley?
I think I live in some strange parallel universe as far as our Conservative friend down there is concerned. I believe the thing called the Barnett formula, isn't there, which we're down the end of. Anthony, could you comment on this? Because I thought you said something earlier about the money that comes to us, a large amount of it goes to NHS rather than us. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is the issue of the Welsh Block Grant. There's two issues there, sorry. The first one is Barnet and whether it funds Wales properly. Some people say yes, some people say no. I won't go into that or I'll bore you to tears. The second one is the point about the funding of the NHS. And the issue is, because the pressures on the NHS are so great, each year that goes by where the Welsh Block Grant doesn't increase in line with inflation mean that the NHS takes more as a percentage of the Welsh Block Grant than it did the year before. I think the figure used to be in the late 30%, so let's say 39% of the Welsh Government's money used to be spent on the NHS. It's now approaching over 50%, I believe. So everything else gets squeezed. And one of the arguments we're making to the previous approach of local government perhaps was to argue against that and maybe inadvertently set itself off against the NHS. I think the more effective approach with Welsh Government is to say, look, the health outcomes of a nation depend on more than just the NHS. As we provide key preventative services, including social care, that's within the sort of the health sector as a whole, or the illness prevention sector, whatever you prefer to call it, that's why you should fund us in line with NHS, rather than just funding the NHS. Because in my view, if we set ourselves up against the NHS for very justifiable reasons, people are very attached to the health service, it provides a great service, we'd hate to see it diminished. I think far better to align ourselves to the common aim that we have and to appeal to Welsh Government that if it wants to stick to its principles of early intervention and prevention and the Future Generations Bill and all that, then it needs to fund the key preventative services we run rather than just the NHS at the expense of everything else.
Try first and then. Hello, thanks, Madam Mayor. It's just a comment. I too share concerns about the raising community tax, but I think that it's something we all have to face. And I appreciate there is help out there for people in difficulties, but there are a lot of ageing population who are not used to using the internet. Can we do more to make them aware that there is financial help available if they cannot go through with their tax?
I mean, we've got a range of ways we try to reach out to people, and not just through the internet. Perhaps I'll get Richard Davis to sort of, provide some information for members so that that can help that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to come back. Thank you, Councillor Ashley, for your comments on there. I just wanted to clarify what I meant by that. Yes, there is a Barnett formula which does allocate finances to Wales, but then it's the Welsh Government to decide how those funds are spent. And that is the point that I was making. And I do take the point from Leader. It's a very fair point. As a council, we have a huge role to play with first-line services. And maybe this is a message that he should take back more strongly to Welsh Government, because there is more ways of spending money than perhaps they're aware of. The NHS is important, but that's not what we're speaking about here. We're talking about local government funding, which is something that is done by Welsh Government, and that's where the money's going to, and it isn't being passed down to us, and that's the point I was making.
Yeah, I don't want to prolong it, but I mean, I do think the elephant in the room with regards to the Welsh Government is that they are also facing austerity as well. So that's passed down from UK Government, because, no, they are. Yeah, this year, but in previous years they've faced consecutive years of austerity where they've had their budget cut again and again and again. And all along, sorry Nick, let me just finish. Councillor Jones, sorry. Every year that goes on, the NHS, the budget increases because demand increases. So that pie is swelling. So they're facing increasing pressures to meet demand from the NHS, which means that other services that they also have responsibility then face the squeeze, which we are doing. But I would say that we have had relative protection, and I think Nigel might back me up on this. We have had relative protection from the Welsh Government over the years in comparison to England, where some councils in England have faced cuts of up to 50%. So if we think this is bad, that's nothing compared to what's happening in England. So we have had relative protections, and I think Welsh Government do need credit where it's due for that. There are issues, as Anthony said, around making sure that Welsh Government understand that we provide preventative services here which effectively keep people out of the hospital and keep people from more acute needs. But those issues aside, there does need to be credit due to Welsh Government for protecting us over the years.
Councillor Mills.
Thank you. If I could just reiterate on one of the points I tried to make earlier. There was a recommendation from the WLGA that the Welsh Assembly Government use part of the £300 million they are holding in reserve. And can I emphasise that figure again? £300 million the Welsh Assembly is holding in reserves, and the WLGA said, can you release some of that to help frontline services? And the Welsh Assembly categorically refused.
It's bad practice. I mean, on a local level, we've heard that £5 million or however, I think it amounts to £9 million if we take into like school reserves as well. That's bad practice. It would give us all of 1 week, maybe 11 days worth of funding for day-to-day stuff. And the same logic there rests for Welsh Government too. I mean, 300 million sounds like an awful lot of money. However, when you're dealing with the NHS and you're dealing with 22 local councils up and down the country and a mass of other services as well, it's really reckless to use that money for revenue. As Councillor Cowan has already mentioned, it's just not good practice.
Okay, members, I don't want to stifle debate, but I'll just bring in Councillor Jones. I think
I just wanted to reiterate the fact, the level of funding. The same pressures are the same. Yes, we can draw to the North East, we can draw to other councils across England, but we're talking specifically about Wales. We're talking about a funding level which is £120 per head of population, whereas England is only at £100. We are going to be reduced slightly, but it's reduced to £115 per head of population compared to England at 100. The fact still remains that within Wales we have got a much better settlement than we give our residents credit for. We've got the money there, the money is coming in, it's being allocated, it isn't coming to us as local authority level, and that is the problem. And as a result of that, we are having to put our council tax up again. And as we quite rightly said, it is 12 years in a row now that we've had to put council tax up. So this isn't entirely to do with austerity, as is always fed to us. Just quite rightly, Madam Mayor, we're finished on that now.
Yeah, just to move progress. I mean, I think we'll have to agree to disagree. We're not going to agree on everything, and that's why we're in different parties. But I think we all agree that we want the best for the public, so we'll agree to disagree on that.
Okay, I think there's no new comments coming in. We'll move to the recommendations, pages 52, 53, 54 and 55 of your agenda. Can I have a mover for those recommendations, please? Seconded, yep. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations have been agreed. Okay, thank you. If we move on to agenda item 11 on page 183, which is the pay policy statement. I think if we ask the officers, give them a chance to leave the room a moment. Okay then, members, if I ask the leader to present the report for us, please. Members, can we... in a way I'm gutted that I didn't get to bang the hammer then, but if we ask the leader to present his report, please, on the paper.
You're always welcome to bang the hammer, just don't throw it at anyone, no matter how much we tempt you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to draw your attention to the report at page 183. I won't speak for too long because you're already sick of my voice today. This is a report for new members that we report every year. It's basically the publishing of our pay policy. It establishes the Council's current position on pay, particularly in relation to senior pay. It takes into account the most recent guidance on the subject published by Welsh Government. It sets out the arrangements for decision making on senior pay, including the role of Council and the Independent Remuneration Panel. It's established the pay ranges for Chief Executives and Chief Officers. It sets out the proposed amendment this year to the executive decision-making rules in the Constitution to reflect the role of full Council in respect to decisions surrounding the pay of the Chief Executive and Chief Officers. It confirms the majority of decisions taken on pay and grading for all staff covered by the policy are made by national negotiating bodies and also form part of the terms and conditions of service of the staff employed under the auspices of these bodies. It confirms that no decision on a cost of living pay rise for all the staff groups covered by the policy has been made to date, but that any costs of living pay award that is agreed nationally during the term of the policy for more than one of the staff groups subject to the policy will be implemented in accordance with their contractual entitlements. It establishes a commitment to implement the real living wage in line with the rates set annually by the Living Wage Foundation, and presents the rate of pay for the Chief Executive and Chief Officers against the median pay for Torvine employees, demonstrating a reducing pay gap as a result of pay restraint by senior staff. As well as the recommendations on page 186, I'll draw your attention to the statement itself on 187. I particularly welcome two things this year. The first is the confirmation of the foundation rate of living wage, which has seen a pay rise for nearly £1,000 of our lowest paid staff, people who work hard to provide vital services. The second is the ratios, which continue to show progress in the right direction. Basically, the Fair Pay Commission suggests ratios of a maximum of 8 to 1 to 12 to 1. Our ratios have declined from 6.41 to 1 to 5.53 to 1. So that shows that as an organisation, our ratio of top pay to average pay is declining and is fair. The report also mentions the savings made on senior management in recent years, including the reduction of the number of chief officer posts from 33 to 27. I very much welcome the pay restraint at the top end of our organisation, including the Chief Executive, who've not received an increase in salary since 2008, as mentioned in paragraph 6.2 of the report. So given those points, I'd like to recommend the approval of the report on page 186 at 7.1. Is that Council approve the attached 2018 pay policy statements at Appendix 1 as an accurate summary of the Council's current policy for the purposes of publication under the Localism Act.
Thank you, Leader. Members, any questions or comments? Yeah.
Anthony, just a quick question. Some of the community councils follow the increases in the national rates of pay. Have we got any idea when they will be agreed?
No, as I understand it, the unions are currently out for negotiation on the pay offer for the bulk of local government workers, and as I hear more, I'll make sure I pass it on to the community councils as requested. I also meant to mention a second recommendation of the report, that the Council delegates authority to the monitoring officer in conjunction with the Members' Constitution Working Party to make amendments to the Constitution to reflect the changes set out in this pay policy.
In that case then, recommendations are on page 186 of the agenda. Have we got a mover? Seconder? Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations are agreed. We give a moment now then for the officers to all come back in. Okay then, thank you everybody. We move on to agenda item 12, page 213, Public Services Board Wellbeing Plan for Torvine. Can I ask Lyndon Puddy, Head of Public Services Support Unit, to present the report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, members. The report before you today commences on page 2 and 3 of the Council's agenda and invites members to consider and approve the content of the Wellbeing Plan as part of the Council's requirement to establish a Torvine Wellbeing Plan as a statutory member of the Torvine Public Services Board. In terms of background, following the introduction of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and the establishment of statutory public service boards,
it is the role of that board to assess the well-being of an area and respond to partnership well-being plans on a 5-year cycle. The plan before you is the product of considerable hard work, planning and agreement across the Public Services Board and Supporting Officers Support Group, and has identified wider wellbeing priority areas and objectives derived from the comprehensive wellbeing assessment undertaken earlier in 2016-17. This has been a whole partnership approach, not just a council plan, and with all partners contributing to reach this stage with the draft plan before you. The Act requires approval of the wellbeing plan by all the statutory members of the Public Services Board, and this includes the Council, and our Bevan University Health Board, South Wales Fire and Rescue Service and Natural Resources Wales, and this plan will be presented to each of those boards for approval. Page 215 of your agenda provides the Council that through the assessment, the Officer Support Group identified 3 key priority areas of work, these being a healthier Torvine based on 3 subsections, being every child has the best start in life, working age adults reaches a healthy older age, and every older person ages well, a wealthier and prosperous Torvine, and a Torvine that has a good environment in which to live and work. Page 216 of your agenda identifies the further work undertaken to develop these priorities into wellbeing objectives, and this has been established through workshops, through consultation and feedback, working with the Commissioner's Office and with Welsh Government, and refined further by the Public Services Board to be the 7 wellbeing objectives contained in the report. These objectives are to develop a functional connected network of natural areas that support the current and future wellbeing needs of local populations, to develop mitigation and adaptation responses to the impacts of climate change, to provide children with the best possible start in life, prevent chronic health conditions through supporting healthy lifestyles and enabling people to age well, tackle the intergenerational patterns of poverty and develop economic resilience, improve local skills through workforce planning, training, apprenticeships and volunteering opportunities, and to create safe, confident communities and promote community cohesion. The draft plan presented before you has been thoroughly scrutinised on 2 separate occasions by the chairs of the Scrutiny Committee in this chamber, once in November and very recently in February, and that was an extensive process that included all the partners as part of that process with those scrutiny members. The November suggestions have been included in the new draft and included this as part of an easy read version, additional appendices to include detail on the public consultation undertaken, reformatting of the plan, improvements to the number of graphics that sit in there, and other further information to allow in tabular format. The scrutiny process was very thorough and very much benefited the final outcome of this draft, and the February scrutiny feedback will be considered as we review and develop the plan. This is an iterative process, it isn't a one-off, and we will include those scrutiny recommendations as we move forward. The plan has also been developed to ensure there is connectivity, to ensure that we reduce duplication with key pieces of work such as the Social Services and Wellbeing Act Area Plan, which you'll have a report on shortly, consultation responses again from the Future Generations Commission as a statutory consultee, and Welsh Government. The plan is extensive and drafted in line with guidance from the Welsh Government and the Commissioner's Office, and we've supplemented this plan with a number of detailed appendices for your consideration. The plan is a high-level strategic document which sets out our direction of travel as a partnership to the collective partnership approach to improving well-being for our citizens, as outlined in the plan within the short, medium and longer term. We recognise as a partnership we cannot do everything we want to at the same time, and we'll need to prioritise our activities further along our well-being objective, as this requires much further planning and understanding of the causes that we will be taking forward, and to be working collaboratively together to undertake deeper dives, best practice, behaviour change, and we're also going to be undertaking a pilot. How we work together will be important. I've already commenced these discussions with the Public Services Board to ensure a collective approach to delivering the plan and the sharing potentially of resources, not just in monetary terms but also in terms of staff and locations. Started on page 247 to 287 of your agenda, the objectives and content of the areas we intend to explore, realise and transform over the term of the plan, concentrating initially in the first 5 years and taking any opportunity to gain any early wins along the way. We're starting with a pilot in Blaenavon. Our wellbeing assessment identified that communities are complex and dynamic places. Each has a different set of social, economic, environmental and cultural experiences which have an influence on the well-being of the people living and working there. We also recognise that no two communities are exactly the same, which is why we are taking a place-based approach to enable us to focus on smaller areas vital to improving well-being. The pilot will provide us with a place-based blueprint of what works well and what doesn't work, building on the strengths of Blaenavon and the people that live there. The plan is to take the learning from the pilot and use it as a roll-out approach with our other objectives to well-being across the council area. The pilot has been secured through Welsh Government grant Smart Living programme to prime the work and is based around Objective 4. We expect through the pilot to identify the community profile, develop grassroots staff to form multi-skilled partnership teams, to work together, develop a risk-sharing agreement and to minimise service impacts. And we will of course be working with the local members on any activity that we'll undertake in the Blaenavon area. A huge amount of work has been undertaken right across our partners, and I'd like to put on record to thank those partners for their contribution, but I'd also like to thank members of our team within PSSU, Sue Brown, Rachel O'Shaughnessy and Andy Wilson, who has put a huge amount of work and activity into this, and we wouldn't be as well coordinated as we are without those officers putting so much time into it. In closing, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to take any questions and would request the Council approve the plan set out on recommendation on page 221 of the agenda.
Thank you, Lyndon. Members, any questions or comments? Oh, Leader?
I'd like to start by thanking Lyndon and his team of officers for their leadership on this issue, and also to thank the partner organisations for the way they've come together to establish the wellbeing plan. It's never easy to get lots of disparate sort of public service organisations, all with their own priorities, to work together on a sort of a common shared agenda, but I think it's coming together in a very promising way in Torvine. The proof of the pudding, I guess, is going to be in the eating. How we work together and put the commitment, the leadership, the staff time and the resources to make things happen. But I really think it should be a model for how we work together as public service organisations to further the, you know, at the end of the day we all serve the same public, so that public have the same priorities and we should work together to achieve them. I've got no time for the old sort of model of public services arguing between each other about whose responsibility something is, and this is very much the opposite of that. It's about us coming together to try and work together to achieve the best for the people we serve. So thank you for the report, and I'd like to recommend the recommendations.
Councillor Evans now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Lyndon, for the report. Obviously, I would support it. Very happy to hear that the pilot scheme is taking place in Blaenavon. And I can understand the logic there. It's a small community, and I should imagine you'll get a good uptake there in the community. There was one question in the implications I wanted to ask Lyndon in regard to the financial implications. I know it's very early days, but can you envisage what kind of financial implications we could be looking at?
Do you mean in terms of the pilot, Councillor Evans, or generally through the wellbeing plan?
Generally, the dual strategy.
I think with all opportunities of partnership working, and the leader mentioned it just now in his response, this is going to be quite a ground move away from traditional budgetary spending and traditional way in which we need to take our activities forward in developing public services. Certainly the view of the Commissioner and of Welsh Government is that this has to be a collective approach to looking at how we resource this plan going forward, and how we take our opportunities to increase well-being outside of the business as usual, which all public services would have already budgeted for. This is about improving the well-being of an area, and there will be budget pressures and there will be difficult conversations to have. But that, as the leader mentioned, is perhaps some of more grown-up conversations that we need to have across the public services to improve the well-being of areas.
Councillor Jones.
It was Councillor Slade, actually. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question. Were Bronavon one of our partners on the putting this document together? That was all.
This document was put together by the Public Services Board, to which both Bronavon and Melyn are members of.
Thank you.
Councillor Seaborn next, and then Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to thank Lyndon for the document. It was quite a difficult document to actually scrutinise originally, but it's certainly better reading now on the council agenda, and there's a lot of hard work gone into it. While I support the pilot project in Blanavon, can I ask what timescale of the rollout programme after the pilot will take place, and how are you going to manage with the different numbers of residents within each of the areas?
The rollout will start in Blanavon. This will be very much a testing bed for us to see what our likely timelines are going to be. It depends on the progress that we take forward in Blanavon. What I take some view from the Commissioner and from Welsh Government is that they're very keen that we don't jump in this with both feet and set unrealistic timelines as we go forward. It's very much a basis of learning from where we start, hence why we wanted to start with a pilot rather than having a rush of different activities to undertake right across the borough with some of the unrealistic timescales that sometimes other plans have put us in, and we're in a difficult situation. We are starting on the Blanavon pilot now. We've only recently had the feedback from Welsh Government to say that the funding is there. We have an executive lead from Natural Resources Wales, Bill Purvis, who is going to be supporting the programme from the PSB executive level, and both me and my colleague David Congreve, working with the other teams, will be working around how we develop that pilot going forward. So in terms of giving you absolute timescales, I can't. I think that this is going to be very much a learning experience for us from taking the pilot in Blanavon and then using that to roll out across the rest of the borough as we progress. But what we're looking for is a blueprint of activity rather than an exact model, because we're very keen to understand that our communities are very diverse from north to south, and there will be different solutions in the north to different solutions in the south. And I think we have to be very mindful of that as we use the blueprint to help us in our planning going forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. And that's my point in the question, how are we going to manage? And there's lots of community groups out there that a lot of councillors are actually members of, and perhaps can help in the preparatory work with rolling that programme out. So if there is something that comes out of Blanavon that is looking good and excellent, and those groups can actually take that forward to actually produce something that you've got to work with when it's time to roll out, that might be a useful piece of work.
I totally agree with you. This is very much a patch-based approach, so we will be engaging with all the opportunities that we get at that grassroots level.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Lyndon for this report, and as I've been on the previous two scrutiny boards, I'd like to thank him and all the members of that board for the constructive way that they approach scrutiny. This plan is very high level and strategic, as we know. Members got a little frustrated because there wasn't really a huge amount of tangible actions, but there is 3 different time frames in this report, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this develop. So it's a good start, and I think it's going to make progress, and I'd recommend the report. Thank you.
Councillor Ashley.
It's interesting now, following on from Peter, and I chaired the last scrutiny on this, and very much all of us as chairs worked on this, and Lyndon and his colleagues, and that's our colleagues is the word we're using, were very much one on it, and that was what was impressive. Public Service Board people working together. It was splitting down the barriers, and I think the leader's clear on that one as well. That's the impressive bit, not business as usual. You're very clear about that, aren't you, Lyndon? And it's not the usual business. Now, the one question we did ask, and I had an answer on it the other day when I even suggested it, was this business about resources. And that's the business. It's not business as usual where we get the resources. What we do. Obviously, I think that pilot, by the sound of it, is going to flag this up. And comments on that, if you would, Lyndon.
I think resourcing will always be an issue for us to consider. The Public Services Board is a statutory board, but there is no statutory provision for budgets within that board. So there are going to be some very difficult conversations. We have agreed the priorities across the Public Services Board. We've got an excellent panel of executive officers that sit on the PSB executive group that will be working with us to consider the resources across the areas that we need to consider, where we need to make those changes, and to support us in taking the work forward. But they are going to be difficult conversations.
Yeah, no, because that's obviously it's a statutory thing. We've got to prepare it, but that was I think the worry that most of us had, and that's something that's going to come out. But no, thank you for that answer.
Okay then. The recommendation is on page 221 of the agenda. Can we have somebody to move the recommendation? Thank you. Seconding. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Thank you, members. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations are agreed. Moving on to agenda item 13, page 341 of your agenda, draft regional area plan. Can I ask Service Manager Phil Diamond to present the report for us, please?
Good morning, everybody. Conscious of time, so I'll keep the update quite brief. The report in front of you is mainly for information purposes only. However, it's to assure you that there are close links between the regional area plan required under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the Wellbeing plan required under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Both acts are sort of predicated on similar principles of early intervention, prevention, co-production, partnership working, and it's important that when acts are very similar in nature, that we obviously avoid duplication. But more importantly, we need to identify areas of synergy and where we can maximise resources. So the area plan sets out the priorities that will be taken forward across the region with the Health Board and the 5 local authorities, shared priorities over the next 3 to 5 years. As you can imagine, there will be similar sort of priorities identified in the Wellbeing Plan, and that's where we are very much looking to ensure that the partnership working is there. And I've been working with officers here in Torfaen as well as the other 4 local authorities and the Health Boards to ensure that. So really, it's a working draft that you have in front of you. I would have much preferred to have been in a position to presented a draft area plan with more detail, but unfortunately, some of the details weren't available. For example, the Integrated Care Fund is a £10 million pot of money that's presented to the Gwent region through the Health Board and is used for lots of different health and social care projects and programmes, such as reducing the delayed transfers of care within hospitals, to community connectors, to children with complex needs. That the profile for Gwent was only agreed in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So simply we didn't have that information available at the time that the draft had to go out. The draft has to meet the statutory requirements and be signed off by the 1st of April for Welsh Government. However, those details will be added. Another example is the National Dementia Strategy, which has only been launched by Welsh Government in the last 2 weeks. And the leaders already congratulated Griffithstown Primary School on the work that they've taken forward with the older population. And that came through a project through, which is again predicated within the area plan around the dementia-friendly communities, which Torvine is, very much taking a lead on. So that's just an example. However, that it would be remiss of us to produce an area plan with details around dementia, more specific details, without seeing the national plan first. So there is a regional dementia board that is taking forward actions, and they have an action plan that is being robustly reviewed. However, we needed to update that in light of the new national strategy. That's another example of where details will be added to the final area plan. So it was just a sort of a note to yourselves, really, that the draft in front of you feels more like a working draft, and there will be more details added. That said, we have presented the draft area plan to scrutiny here in Torvine, and there were some very useful comments fed back to us, and all of the comments have been agreed, and they are also featured within the report. So I guess just to sort of reiterate, really, this plan is an area plan that will be taken across the region with the partners from different local authorities and the health board. It will link in very closely to the wellbeing plan that you have just previously agreed, and obviously it was an opportunity for us to assure you that both those plans will be linked. In terms of monitoring, there is a statutory duty to produce an annual report, and that report will have to be submitted back to Welsh Government, and if members wish to see a copy of the annual report once produced, it would be very easy task for us to bring that back to you as well, just to assure you that the area plan is being delivered. And happy to take any comments.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, a very interesting report. I noticed the plan's been developed by the Regional Partnership Board and third sector partners. Could you tell me a little bit about the involvement of third sector partners in this, please?
Yes, the Regional Partnership Board is a statutory partnership that's been brought in through the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and both umbrella organisations, Garvo and TVA, are members of that board. However, we also have a statutory citizen panel and a provider forum that has been established here in the Gwent region, where the third sector partners also have sort of opportunities to highlight ideas, issues and concerns. So both statutory members at the partnership board and underpinning subgroups.
Councillor Ashley.
You heard that we did scrutiny on the wellbeing, the stuff that Linda was doing, the public service board. One of the principles they had in there was filling in the not filling in for business as usual. Does this on this one, is this business as usual? Do you have adequate resources? I asked that question. Or is it something different because you're bringing together third sector parties? I'm just trying to where this sits in terms of provision. I remember Keith was probably wrong about this as well, but I'm just trying to think where it sits in terms of provision. You've got carers, you've got autism, stuff that I'm particularly interested in personally, but obviously stuff for older people. Where are you sitting in terms of what you're doing?
It's a sort of a mixture, really. Obviously, there is an element of business as usual that has to be taken forward, and within the plan, we are looking for synergy with partners and other local authorities and the health boards, how we do things better together. However, this plan has to be innovative. I mean, you've spoken quite a bit today in terms of the budget, austerity, and I believe someone's already mentioned ageing population earlier as well. So we know that the demands for services will be increasing within austerity. So yes, there will be elements to this plan which we believe will be quite innovative, but also new in terms of the way it's being taken forward. And I can give you sort of many examples of where we're trying to do that through social enterprises and cooperatives. But the biggest part of that, in order to be innovative and to create those solutions, is through co-production and engagement with our citizens and the people most affected by this.
Come back very quickly. Are we going to stop this stuff that those of us that have been around lots of years around, where you get an initiative or you get project funding, which is the problem? Services are based on that, and 3-4 years. You can have it in any area, and then it's happening, it's brilliant, and then it's gone. Carers suffer from it quite often, and certainly other services I know of. It's a problem we all suffer. That's the thing I think a lot of people want to see the end of, if possible.
Yes, it's a question of sustainability, isn't it? Yes. I mean, we can't guarantee that all projects that are implemented and developed through this area plan will continue, but very much sustainable services is at the heart of both the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the wellbeing of future generations. And yes, it is very much a principle and bedrock that we are taking forward under this plan.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, then if we look at the recommendations on page 346, can I have somebody to move and second them? Thank you. Show of hands then, all those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations are agreed. Move on then to agenda item 14 on page 409. Blaenavon Town Centre Conservation Area, confirmation of permanent Article 4 direction to core area of Broad Street. Can I ask Richard Lewis, Head of Planning and Development, to present the report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, this report then is about the implementation of a permanent Article 4 direction order for selected properties within the Blaenavon Town Centre Conservation Area. Just to remind members, the purpose of an Article 4 direction, it's not there to prevent all development, it's there so that we can control otherwise permitted development through the planning process, and that helps us to manage development properly. The background to this is on the 19th of December 2017, Council approved an Article 4 direction, which meant that it would be in place for 6 months. That expires, it came into force on the 21st of December, and 6 months from there it would expire unless the Council confirmed the order. The public have been consulted on the Article 4 that's already in place. All the affected property occupiers and owners have been notified of this. During the consultation period, there's been no objections or representations to the order. So the Council are now being asked to confirm the order, which effectively would make it permanent. Just a reminder of the reasons for asking for the Article 4 order. First of all, it increases protection from works to the properties in Blaenavon Town Centre Conservation Area. The Housing Lottery Fund has requested that the Council considers implementing such an order because it should produce better management and better control of the built environment within that area. And thirdly, the Article 4 direction order was recommended in a report that went to members in October 17, the Blaenavon Town Centre Conservation Area appraisal, and in that approved report it was recommended that the Council would be seeking an Article 4 direction order. So the recommendation, which is at paragraph 13.1, is that the Council does now confirm the Article 4 direction. This effectively means that it will become a permanent order and it would remain in place until it's cancelled. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Members, any questions or comments? Oh, yeah.
Chair. Thank you, Richard, for the report. As you said, it has been discussed at various times here at Council. Obviously, on the result of the recommendation, will the affected properties be informed of that decision?
They would be, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
To move and second those recommendations. Thank you. Show of hands then, all those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. The recommendations are agreed. Move on to agenda item 15 on page 423. And this is the response to the petition requesting that trees at Broadway Road be thinned out and cut. Can I ask Andrew Osborne, Group Leader from Environment and Street Scene, to present the report for us, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members. So the report on page 423 concerns the petition from the residents of Broadweir Road, Cwmbran. Before I start going through the report, I'd just like to make a verbal amendment to the recommendation, because the report is actually for information. So I'll read the petition that was handed in to Council in the December meeting. The residents of 44 to 68 Broadweir Road live in darkness even on the sunniest of days. The houses were built 40 years ago and small trees were planted within Cwmbran Park immediately next to the rear of the houses. These trees have been allowed to grow and now completely overshadow our homes. We are forced to live in darkness in our living rooms or use expensive electricity. Many are pensioners and have limited finances. The unnecessary use of electricity also goes against the cleaner and green ethos that is a council priority. Living in darkness, artificial light, cannot be healthy for both physical and mental well-being. Whole branches have fallen off, and we believe this is a health and safety risk too. We, the undersigned, request that the trees running alongside our back gardens be thinned out and cut so as not to overshadow our homes. And so that's a quote from the petition. So I just need to refer to the Council's policy on trees. It's important to recognise that trees provide a wide range of benefits, such as absorbing carbon, filtering pollution, providing amenity and biodiversity value, recreational space for the wider community. And there's also some evidence to suggest that street trees increase property values by 20%. So as a result of this, we do have a robust tree policy in place to ensure that works to trees are only done sort of health and safety reasons, safety of the public, or if the trees are diseased, dead, dying or dangerous. I also like to point out that in 2012, some work was done to these trees previously because they were damaging the fence, so the canopies of the trees were lifted, so the lower branches would have been removed at that time under the supervision of our qualified arborist. The trees were further inspected in 2016 by an independent company as part of a wider survey of trees across Torfaen, and the company advised that no works were required in accordance with our policy. In a further request in 2017 for the trees to be cut again, an inspection was undertaken and determined that the trees were safe and there were no issues. So, just thinking about some of the considerations here, we do recognise and appreciate the concerns of the residents, but in thinking about the well-being objectives we've heard about this morning, the well-being considerations relate not just to the well-being of people in the houses, but the well-being of the wider community, the well-being of the environment and the amenity of the area. There's also, in terms of risks, consideration that cutting trees for purposes of increasing light into homes is something that I think we get an awful lot of questions and requests for, and if we weren't to be adhering to our robust policy, then we could be asked for many, many thousands of trees to be removed across the authority, which I think would have a devastating impact on the landscape and the wider well-being benefits of trees. There's also the risk that the Council has a duty under Section 6 of the Environment Act to seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity. So in removing trees for such reasons as has been requested, we would perhaps be reducing the biodiversity of the area. So, as I say, members are asked to note that for the reasons I've explained, that the request to undertake works to the trees be declined. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Members, any questions or comments? Jason.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the site yesterday and saw the trees in question, so I do know them pretty well. Nobody is suggesting that we remove the trees. I think everybody values the benefits that trees across Torfaen has, and I think from some of the recent statistics I've seen on scrutiny, Torfaen is one of the most densely populated boroughs in Wales, if not the highest in terms of canopy coverage. So that's something that should be celebrated and applauded. The tree policy itself is quite robust, as you've said, and I think this particular case is one where it's the interpretation of that policy as it relates to residents' daily lives. And I would ask members, when considering the vote on this particular issue, to put yourselves in those residents' shoes, waking up in shadows, living the day in shadows, obviously is going to have a negative impact on not only your day-to-day life, but certainly your mental health and well-being. So you can appreciate they're asking us to trim the trees to allow some extra light. And I think as members we need to apply some common sense to effectively what is a very robust policy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments there. I do empathise with the situation. However, if we agree to this, we set the precedent, and that's the issue here. So you are right, we are actually the highest in Wales in terms of tree canopy, and that's something to be very proud of. But the concerning note that you'll have seen from the reports that you read at scrutiny is that if we continue with the decline of trees that has been over the last few years, then it won't be for long. And so I'm saying this not just as the Cabinet member, but as also as the biodiversity champion, is that we need to put a wealth of priority and value on the trees as well. So yeah.
Stuart Ashley.
I did do this tree scrutiny, and I want to know when we do manage trees, because you go around certain wards, certainly urban wards, and we cut the tops off some trees in the urban setting where I believe they polder the the West Country version of it. We take the tops off and they grow back. Obviously, we do that as Pollardin's the word, and obviously not in Cwmbran Park. I mean, what we're talking about is tree management. I'm not getting involved in this debate, by the way, in that sense. But the point about it is we all get requests as councillors for things like this, and what we haven't got is a clear management, from what I can see, is a clear management idea. Because you get a lot of people, these are, from what I understand, lime trees. They're huge. And I've had it round my area as well. We've got other trees. Leylandii is the biggest offender, and what you do with what we need is a clear policy, and I'm the first person to go about trees and the policy. The problem is actually when we manage trees and the perceived need of management, and they've got an issue here on this one, very much so, about light issues and about management. Biodiversity in terms of cutting trees and when you cut them, when you manage them, etc. We've obviously got woods around the place where we have to manage them, cut them to regenerate. Now that is the problem we got here, from what I can see, and I can see your management problem with this as well. When do you manage trees in parks? Because some of our parks have not been touched for years. And what is your policy on the issue?
Just before I let Andrew come back a sec, I've just been advised by the Montrenossa that because of the amendment to this, we're not actually voting for a decision on this, we're voting to note the decision that has already been made, okay, just so we're all aware of that. If I bring Andrew back in a moment.
Councillor, I just refer you back to the policy, which is we would do work to trees that are dead, diseased, dying or dangerous. And where you see work being done to trees elsewhere within the authority, those are the reasons under the policy that it would be carried out.
Yeah. I did ask what our policy was on management of trees otherwise. So you said unless they're dead and dying, we don't have a policy.
Well, that is the basis of the policy, although members will be aware that we've recently done some scrutiny on updating the policy because, there is a case, I think, for reviewing it under the legislation we've been talking about previously in the meeting today.
Thank you, Andrew.
We've got Councillor Cross next, then Councillor Jones.
And that was what I was going to get at, is that the policy that currently exists is a functional policy. So I know how you view this, but the actual policy that was mentioned earlier today that has been through scrutiny and the recommendations have been sent to myself, that is far more encompassing of everything that we do in terms of biodiversity, about our responsibilities as a council. But to the main point, which is the issue that I tried to stress just now with Councillor O'Connell's, is that if the precedent here is that if we chop trees one place, whatever type they are, then we're going to end up having the same problem elsewhere as well. And then good trees, good, healthy, strong trees that are providing biodiversity and value would be needlessly removed, in my view.
Come back very quickly. I don't think you've got a precedent, because what I think you've got is a management problem, and that came out in scrutiny. The biodiversity, if you chop the tree, it grows back, and the issue probably is trees are too tall or are not happening. Now, I'm not going to get an argument on it. It's just that we're talking about pollarding and we're talking about other ways of managing trees. The problem is it comes down to whether we've got enough resources to do this.
Well, we are getting into a debate, but in the report it does state that they have been managed, they have been reviewed, and an independent organisation has assessed them as well. So I think that's important to note.
Okay, Peter Jones, come in.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on what Councillor Ashley was saying there. We have scrutinised the tree policy recently, and certainly one of the concerns that came out in our scrutiny committee was this issue of management of trees. And I know that you're going to be looking afresh. It does need to be looked at, because all of us, all councillors, get queries about overgrown trees. They do need managing. I know it's a resource issue. All I put a plea in is that at least it's considered.
Absolutely, and actually scrutiny members have seen that report. That report is public, so you know you can. I'm sure there's a webcam that you can view it on, and I urge councillors to engage whether you're on that committee or not. But either way, even if we had that policy and applied it here, it would still be the same. The same outcome would be achieved.
Ron Burnett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Totally agree with it. I mean, in my area, if we chopped every tree down everybody wanted, there'd be no trees left. I mean, because new areas, the trees grow and grow and grow, and we do have to have a management on them as well. But I will take an issue up with you later, Andrew, about dead, dying or dangerous. It doesn't always apply, I can assure you. Then it's, I don't want to get parochial on it, but it's something I'll bring up with you, that there has been a situation where trees have been cut and shrubs for no reason whatsoever, only for cosmetic reasons, you know what I mean? But that's something I'll bring up with you later. But yes, we do have to have management on them, but if we cut every tree down, there's affecting light, we know there'd be no trees left.
Stuart Evans next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I got great sympathy with the residents who have to live in darkness, really, where they're referring to in the report. I mean, we've got to consider their health and well-being as well in this. I mean, I think at some stage, and I sat on the scrutiny with the tree policy as well, but I think at some stage, I know we've got a good, robust, and it's been mentioned several times, a robust tree policy in place, but I do think we need to revisit it at times now to review it possibly. And perhaps this is one of, maybe others in this situation, but we need to prioritise them as we go along, but I do think it's a concern.
Giles David.
Everybody's talking about chopping trees down. All the people's talking about here is just trimming them back. In my ward alone, I've got loads of issues with people living in darkness in their homes from trees which was planted years and years ago too close to properties. I just think our policy needs to be reviewed to trim these trees back, because at the end of the day, you know, fair is fair. People have got to live like this day in, day out. It isn't fair if they've got to live in darkness. So I'm against chopping trees down. But if it's affecting people's life and well-being and it's too close to their properties and it's on our land or cabins, well, perhaps, you know, we should be looking to trim them back or crown them wherever. At the end of the day, and we're not going to end up killing the trees, we just prune them back.
Yeah, I got Fiona and then Faye.
Thank you. For clarity, the first point I really need to stress is that everyone's saying about reviewing the tree policy, it's already been reviewed. It's already gone through a process, through scrutiny, and it's been reviewed. So members from across parties have had an opportunity to give their views. So that's already been done, and that should be, you know, a really good bonus for us. But again, still the same outcomes would happen. going back again to what I said with Stuart's point, is that yes, I totally agree that it doesn't, and Giles's point is that it doesn't mean that trees need to be cut down. They are maintained in some fashion, reduced in some fashion, whichever it might be, but as long as they're not removed. But these trees have been independently assessed outside of us as well. It's like I say, within the report, it's as much as I empathise with the specific situation, members have had an opportunity to feed back into the scrutiny report that's been reviewed on trees, and these trees have been assessed by an independent organisation.
Faye Jones.
Can I just ask, are we looking at the Future Generations Act and the Wellbeing Act and not looking at these particular people's well-being, that they're living in darkness and we're not prepared even just to thin them out? And then could I ask as well what we do about Landeli, because they're a nuisance, aren't they?
Yes, definitely. The consideration here is the wider requirements under the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. So that's considering social, economic and environmental issues and thinking about the long term, the future generations. And, you know, safeguarding biodiversity, safeguarding trees to create lovely parks or recreation for local people are all important considerations, as is the well-being of the people living in the houses. I fully agree. So yes, definitely full account of the legislation.
Looking at the individuals though, couldn't we just trim some of those trees back to help those people have more light and use less electricity?
Well, as has been explained previously, what the concern is that if we respond in that way, then we could be inundated by requests for trees to be thinned, removed or whatever all across the borough. And I think then we may be faced with far many more objections to that than we may have today.
I just think it's a bit of a sort of sledgehammer approach, and that perhaps we ought to look at everything a little bit more individually.
Councillor Shepherd.
Just picking up on what Faye said, really, every case is going to be individual and different, so there's got to be, you know, we've got to draw a line where some people's, I get asked no end of times every week, can you see about cutting these trees down? But it's not going to be the same every single resident. Every single person are going to have different effects on their lives. So I don't think it can be clear cut. You just can't say, well, no, we're not going to trim it down because of biodiversity, etc. There's got to be individual cases.
Yeah, Fiona.
To come back on that, yeah, I agree. There's always individual cases, hence why I thought it was important that the tree policy would be reviewed so that it's got greater benefits and takes on board a lot more of a holistic approach for the council. But in view of specifics, if we start to, the reason that we have a policy is because we want to be fair to everyone. If we start saying, well, okay, well, we'll change it here for you, then again we set the precedent. You have to have a policy to be able to engage with everybody on a fair level playing field. So although it might not appease everybody and give them what they want, it is as fair as we can possibly put it. Yeah, I think, like I said, the trees are important to our lives in lots of different ways as well.
Members, we stop there because as I pointed out, we're just, this is, get my words out, the vote is to note this decision. But I would remind people, even though a review has been done, doesn't mean that another review can't be done, but I think that's the scope of outside of this particular agenda item that we can take forward. So if we move to the vote on this, remember we're noting, not actually making a decision as such. So anyway, recommendation page 425, which will be verbally amended to note the decision. Can I have a show of hands? Oh, actually, I've got to have a mover and seconder, sorry, for the... Can I have a mover and seconder? Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, all those in favour of noting this decision? Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations have been noted. We'll move on then to agenda item 16, page 433. We're looking at committee vacancies. Can I ask Dalit Harris, Monitoring Officer and Assistant Chief Legal, to present your report for us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek a change to the membership of the following committees: They are the Cleaner Communities, Learning Communities, the Democratic Services and the Licensing Committee. Councillor Matthew Ford was appointed to serve on those committees, but has since stepped down as a councillor, and so a vacancy has occurred on each of those committees. In line with the political balance, the leader of the Labour group has been asked to nominate replacement councillors to serve on each of the committees. So that the recommendation is that Council agrees to appoint Councillor Rose Seaborn to replace former Councillor Matthew Ford on the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee with immediate effect, and that Council agrees to appoint Councillor Emma Rapier to replace former Councillor Matthew Ford on the remainder of the committees listed at paragraph 2.1, again with immediate effect. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Members, any questions or comments on this one? No? Sorry, a show of hands then, all those in favour. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. Those recommendations are agreed. Agenda item 17, page 435, another vacancy, this time on the Pensions Committee. Can I ask Dallas again?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, this report is just to notify Council of a vacancy on the Pensions Committee. Councillor Ron Burnett was appointed to serve on that committee, but has since stepped down from that role. The leader of the independent group has been asked to nominate a replacement member of the Pensions Committee. To date, no replacement has been nominated, so in line with political balance, the seat will be held as vacant. So the recommendation is the Council notes the vacant seat on the Pensions Committee. Thank you.
Any comments or questions on that one? Councillor Carr.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to make some comments on that as chair of the Pensions Committee. I point out to the Council that the Pension Committee is not an overview and scrutiny committee. It's a decision-making body, and as such is heavily regulated, as you would expect, as it administers £2.7 billion worth of assets belonging to employees of this Council. We have a lot of work in front of this committee going forward and in the past. As most members here are aware, there has been the Welsh pooling, the Department for Communities and Local Government are overseeing that, and they will be doing their best to ensure that we have correct governance of that pooling arrangement. There have been other issues around environmental sustainability and governance to do with the fact that we've set up a responsible investment working party. We have had issues from local environmental groups such as Friends of the Earth and their Fueling the Fire document, and from trade unions who are looking at us to go forward with a responsible investment portfolio. And what I'm saying basically is I urge the independent group to find someone to sit on this committee, because it means now that those members who are there are having to do extra work, and at this particular moment in time there is a lot of extra work to be done. So I do urge it upon the independent group to find somebody to sit on this committee as soon as they possibly can.
Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If it's acceptable to the independent group and to the leader, my colleague, Councillor Jones, is quite happy to step in to fill this vacancy.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. The committee has to be politically balanced, so unfortunately it has to be a member of the independent group who wants to fill in the vacancy. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are only, I think it's 5 members, or I'm a member of this committee. We heard earlier from the independent group that on the budget discussion that they didn't take up the offer to take part in those discussions. The pension committee affects a huge number of residents in Torfaen. Can I just urge the independent group, think again on this. There's only 5 of us on that committee, 4 at the moment because there's a vacancy. We need their support. Can they please take part to make sure there's a political balance?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, as I say, it's come through on the agenda here, and Councillor Ray Williams will take up the position on the Pensions Committee. Thank you.
That's brilliant, thank you. Janice, can we start this check? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just checking that. Yes, well, the recommendation could be amended, is that Council appoints Councillor Ray Williams to sit on the Pensions Committee. Are we all happy with that, Council? Can we have a mover and seconder then for that amended recommendation? Thank you. All those in favour? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. That's been agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 18 is member question time. There are no questions today, so move straight on to agenda item 19, which is the date of the next meeting. For your information, members, next council meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 28th of March at 10 a.m. here in the council chamber. Agenda item 20, cabinet decisions from the 13th of February 2018. Members, cabinet decisions start on page 437 of the agenda. There were no challenges to any of these decisions. Are there any questions from members about them? In that case, then, are you happy to note those decisions? Yeah, thank you, members. Those decisions are noted. This is the end of the council meeting. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. Can I just remind you to sign the attendance register and interests form if you haven't done so already, and return your cards to the holders. Thank you.